You want to know everything about living in New York versus Orlando, Florida? And this is a video for you. Stay tuned till the end of the video and I'll give you my number one difference I have found between living in both places. Let's go. Hey everyone, my name's Cameron Hydes. I'm a realtor here in Orlando, Florida. And if this is your first time coming to the channel, welcome. And consider hitting like and subscribe if you want to know everything about eating, breathing, sleeping in Orlando, Florida. We always get people reaching out from around the world that want to move to Orlando, Florida and need our help. And we absolutely love it. So if that's you and you need assistance in moving to Orlando, Florida, give us a call, text, email, I don't care what it is, reach out. We are happy to help you. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the biggest differences I have found from living in New York State and Orlando, Florida. Okay, so the first thing I found, I'm going to get it out of the way. It doesn't snow. Obviously. So I'm just gonna get the obvious out of the way. So if you live in New York and you know what I mean, you have probably been through winters where you were like, why do I live here? And yet you still stayed forever, but now you're considering moving. So look, obviously it doesn't snow in Florida. I will say there was every like 50 years, they get an ice storm on the panhandle of Florida. I was stationed there at the time. It's hilarious if you've been from the north, because everyone's freaking out and you're like, it's just a little ice. But in Orlando, no, it doesn't snow. It doesn't get that cold. Sure, like once you get used to it, it cools off in the winter. But overall, like you're obviously not gonna have winter. So if you're tired of the winter, you're tired of the snow, then obviously you just live in Florida. Now, the trade-off is you got hurricanes, a lot more rain. You know, I mean, okay, so if you grew up in New York, you know, during the spring, there's always a long period of time where it just rains. Everything's muddy, it's wet. Look, in Florida, that's hurricane season guaranteed. From April through November, you're gonna get rain guaranteed every day at some point. So if that's not for you, maybe you don't wanna live here. I mean, you know, it can be a turnoff. So take a trip, experience the weather for yourself. Well, one thing I will say is a trade-off is people, you know, a lot of people move to Florida from the West Coast, let's say, and they do not have humidity. Well, growing up in New York, you know that there are times it gets super humid. It's just an East Coast thing. You know, I mean, the South sure is a lot higher humidity than New York can be, but you're going to have an understanding of what it's like. Also, let's be honest, if you're from New York, you probably have vacationed to either Myrtle Beach or Florida to Disney World at some point. And if you haven't, take a trip, experience it for yourself, because it may not be for you. Okay, so the next thing that I found, the biggest difference between living in New York and California, really is just the proximity to being close to things, right? So obviously you're coming from New York City or Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse. If you're coming from a big city, then it's kind of irrelevant, you know, but if you're coming from where I grew up in middle of nowhere, middle of Wyoming County, you're gonna know that, you know, there's things, but like, I mean, I grew up, a hospital is probably like 25 minutes away, you know. Well, here in Orlando, obviously, like that's not gonna be a problem, but you can still get the away from city feeling, but not be as far away from anything anymore. And I think that was like an amazing difference between where I grew up in that area and then Orlando, is that you're not going to have to worry about being away from hospitals that far. You're going to have stores like Costco and like, you know, all these big stores where, I mean, what do we have up there? I mean, like Tops, you know, and things like that. It's different. You're going to have a lot more name brand stores that are different than you're used to, but at the same time, like, you're going to have bigger warehouse stores that you just may not have been used to growing up, especially in the country where you probably had a small grocery store and you're like, people shop at more than one grocery store. Yeah, that was me. Like when I came, and it's just like, you know, my wife's like, oh yeah, we coupon, we go to this store and that store, and then you got to check the ads. And I'm like, oh, I would just shop at my local grocery store because I didn't feel like driving 30 minutes to go to Tops. So I went at like the local one in town. So if that's you, I understand. And I promise you that's going to completely change if you make the decision to come out here. But at the same time, The food, right? So Orlando has its own, its own culture of food, right? So like obviously Cuban culture is a huge thing down here. So if you love like Puerto Rican food, Cuban food, like Cuban sandwiches, like there's so many options to choose from, and it's amazing. I love it. I really do, and I appreciate it. But let's say this is for my Western New York people. If you grew up and you had like Salem hot dogs and you had, white hots and garbage plates and pizza, when you come down to Orlando, it doesn't really exist. And if you know what a chicken finger sub is, then me and you are the same, and good luck finding that down here. I'm determined it exists because there are tons of New York people down here, but you're not going to have the pizza and like the specialty foods that you're used to, especially wings. Like no one understands how to do wings. You leave New York and for some reason you come to places like Orlando and they're like, oh yeah, don't you just go to like Little Caesars? And no, nope. So look, there's a reason why I'll make pizza at home myself. It's because like you do find places that make good pizza, but it's not like we're in like a small town New York. Like your pizza place is going to have really good pizza because it's just the culture. This is what we do up there, right? So coming down here, if that's not something you're willing to give up, then it might not be for you moving down here. Especially if you're coming from New York City, like holy cow, like you're tons and tons of food options, where in Orlando, you're going to have your upscale restaurants, you're going to have like your own culture of food, but it's not going to be what you're used to living up in New York. And that actually trails me into my next thing that I found different in Orlando is everyone, like, people from New York and you're going to run into them. I think it was the craziest thing when I made the decision to move here, right? Is people always said, they're like, oh, I know so-and-so moved down there. Oh, I know someone who moved down there, and everyone's from New York. And then you start realizing as you go through like your extended family and friends, and you start to realize like, oh, I know that person. They live an hour in that city, or this person lives 30 minutes over there. Like you start to realize that there's a lot of people from Canada and New York in Florida, right? Especially from New York. Holy cow. Like it's Canadians and New Yorkers, like everywhere you go. Like that's where like I run into people and I'm like, oh no, I'm not from Florida originally. Like I came from here, or I used to vacation and now we moved here. Like guess what? You're now in that crowd. And it's not a bad thing. It's just, get used to, you're not necessarily alone here. Like there's actually, like I felt crazy, like especially, okay, try walking around and being like, hey, do you know what a chicken finger sub is? Hey, do you know what a chicken finger sub is? Yeah, people don't know what that is for the most part. But all of a sudden you run into someone who's like from Buffalo, or any place in New York really that still understands what that is. And they're like, oh, I know what that is. Like it's crazy. And like I've had, I've made them at home before and had people come over, and like it's just understand that there is your community here and you just got to find them. And it was like the most cool thing to find is that there's still people that I knew and understood, back home, where you can kind of reminisce about the things you do miss, but, are still available here. And it's something that, if you're thinking about moving here, then that could be a great thing. But if you're looking to have immediate access to that comfort food that you were used to having, you're just not really going to find it. It might exist. I haven't found it yet. So if you do know somewhere that has some of these items down here and it's good, let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to check that out as soon as I can. All right. And the final thing that I think was the biggest, not so much fact when I came out to Florida, was the fact that when you move out here, you start to realize that it's not just, if you're from New York, you understand, it's not just old people everywhere, right? Like coming out here, it's like, oh man, am I going to see just a bunch of, 60-plus-year-olds, and I'm over here with my wife and 2 young kids, just like living in a senior community? No. Okay. So if we've been from New York, you understand, like we all know someone who during they hit 60 plus, they retire and they're like, it's my time. And they transition into, as soon as that first snowflake falls, they go to Florida right away. And then once the last snowflake melts, they come back up north to be with family during the spring and summer. So coming down here, I started to realize really quick that it's just not senior communities. Like sure, during the winter, like tourism picks up, the senior communities, pick up because there's always going to be that group that do that. But you start to realize that it really is actually, now it's turning into a place where there's just like a lot of different families and people moving here we're really starting communities from scratch. And that was like the most amazing thing to get into, where you're like, wow, we have to be like the only ones doing this. You're not. Like, you come out here, you start to realize there's families. Like I don't know how many times, like, remember we went to the beach and we just ran into a family, like in the water, our kids are playing, and out of nowhere struck up a conversation, and they're like, you know, we're new too. Like, let's meet up, let's do stuff. And you start to realize there's a community of people like you that, you know, decided to ignore stigmas and, you know, make the decision to move out here, and they're looking for community. You know, I mean, also another story, you know, about community is moved out here, and, you know, we're kind of doing our thing, we're getting set up, we're getting going, and then all of a sudden talking to family and realize, like, oh yeah, you have a distant cousin that lives like an hour over here, and your uncle moved up to Daytona. And I'm just like, when? Well, you start to realize, right, that not everyone communicates when they're making the move. And you'd be surprised if you start reaching out, like, you actually might find either friends, family that have already made the decision to move down here or in the process, to where you might not be alone as you initially thought moving out here, if that it's a situation you find yourself in, like we did. So, you know, it was one of those pain points that really got alleviated. But at the same time, you know, tourism does get heavy. So that was a big difference I had from New York. Growing from the country, people didn't really, tourism wasn't a thing, right? Like, we were the tourists when we went on vacation, because no one vacationed to where we were, like, ever. Like, come on, you vacation from the country of New York, not to it. And so when we came down here, we realized that you really have to choose the community that's right for you. So you're not putting yourselves right in the line of where tourism, or maybe you put yourself right in a community like Kissimmee that's full of short-term rentals in certain parts, where your home could be surrounded by short-term Airbnbs that serve as Disney World in the surrounding area. So like I said, we're always getting reach outs from people moving from, especially New York to Orlando. So if that's you and you need help or guidance, reach out. We are always here for you to help guide you in the right direction. We're all definitely willing to help if you have any questions. So call, text, email, like always. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.